And good evening, everybody. Hi, Melissa, Charles, Kathy, Sue. Hello, Kathy, Michael, Charles again, and Corky is here, being here. And thanks for joining me tonight for my kind of wrap up here. I'm going to wrap up this book, Rulers of Evil. And the reason is that I've gotten to the end of the part of the book that he's really given us the dirt, the history. And the next part of the book really delves into a lot of religious, theological ruminations back and forth about things, and it's not very interesting to me. And I've got so much else on my mind that I want to just kind of skip uh, that and move on. So let's uh, let's think just for a minute about the context of this book. It was published in 1999 by Osprey, believe it or not. It's the name of the press. And since then, it has been rather poorly received. And I want to tell you a little bit more about Tupper Saussy's reputation so that we can try to put this thing in context. To do so, I'm going to go over to Wikipedia and I'm going to share this page. All right. So, what do you want to know about Tupper Saussy from our friends, quote unquote, at Wikipedia? Well, we all know that Wikipedia is rather closely monitored by certain intelligence agencies. So, keep that in mind as we read this. Frederick Tupper Saussy III, uh, 1936 to 2007, was an American composer, musician, author, artist, and conspiracy theorist. Yay! All right, we love you for that, Tupper. Already, I mean, that's my when I on my tombstone. Because seriously, this is a badge of honor to say, oh, Wikipedia says he's a conspiracy theorist. Okay, his contemporaries describe him as a self-styled theologian, restaurant owner, ghostwriter of James Earl Ray's biography, King assassination conspiracy theorist again, anti-government pamphleteer, and radical opponent of the federal government's taxation and monetary authority. All right. He was born in Statesboro, Georgia, grew up in Tampa, Florida, and graduated from the University of the South at Sewanee, Tennessee, 1958. So what's that make him? Probably 15 years older than me. His jazz combo there put out a university subsidized album, Jazz at Sewanee, which included several original compositions. Then he taught English at Montgomery Bell Academy in Nashville, co founded an ad agency, kept his musical career alive with recording dates and club sessions. Um, and, well, a lot of miscellaneous musical credits here. Um, not really familiar with any of that, but not saying that's not a big deal. He was the songwriter and keyboardist for the psychedelic pop band the Neon Philharmonic, whose vocalist was Don Gant. We go on with a number of more musical credits that I won't recite. He was also a painter. His exhibition of watercolors was given in 1972. That's an important thing to know, isn't it? Theater, politics, and here we go. Now, here's how Wikipedia characterizes what you and I have just spent 17 nights reading. Saussy published a book on what he called the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. That's a different one, it's earlier, in which he claims that the American Revolution and its resulting constitutional republic have been single handedly designed and supervised by a Jesuit named Lorenzo Ricci, this country's true founding father. Unquote. Between 1980 and 1987, Saussy edited the Main Street Journal, advising and reporting on political action aimed at restoring the gold and silver monetary system in the U.S. and arguing against federal taxes. Convicted on federal income tax charges in Chattanooga in 1985 and unsuccessful in his appeals, Saussy went on the lam in 1987 rather than begin serving a 1 year sentence at the federal prison in Atlanta. Later, he befriended James Earl Ray, who had confessed to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. After Ray, who was in prison, read of Saussy's defense in Tennessee newspapers, inquired by postcard if Saussy would be interested in helping Ray write and publish his autobiography. Thus began a collaboration that resulted in the publication in 1987 of Tennessee Waltz, The Making of an American Political Prisoner. After the book was published by Saussy in 1987, Ray disavowed parts of it and sued Saussy. Legal problems, and you know about the tax thing. I'm not going to read through that again, but he did spend, I think, almost a year or something in 14 months. He did 14 months at Taft Correctional Institute. Uh, and he got to be the chapel music director and piano instructor. How sweet. Uh, During his fugitive years, he pursued his suspicions about the religious element in the origins of the American government. Published by Osprey, once again, The Rulers of Evil. He expanded on his book's historical speculation later in alleging conspiracies about 9/11. Oh my God, orchestrated by Dick Cheney and the Pope. Well, that's an odd idea. Dick Cheney, the one that said, don't call off don't yeah, don't countermand the order. Yeah, and the Pope, huh? Whom Saucy calls the undesignated de facto chairman of the United States Corporation. Well, there we go into the U.S. corporation ideas. As Saucy writes, 9/11 could only have been a ruse created by the American presidency to furnish a pretext for restricting the rights and property of Americans in order to redistribute American funds and forces to the Middle East and soon elsewhere, pursuant to the papacy's design, unquote. Well, uh, marriage, divorce, second wife, more music, heart attack, March 16th, 2007, Nashville, Tennessee, at 70 years of age. And there you go. Rulers of Evil, characterized as a conspiracy theory. James Earl Ray, who we know was not guilty because of the civil case that wasn't mentioned here, uh, now condemned because he supposedly confessed. Well, that's not exactly right there, Wikipedia. And, Saucy, he had a pretty good theory with the income tax thing. You'd have to go back and read the beginning of Rulers of Evil to get into that stuff. But you see, what's going on here is he has become radioactive. You shouldn't cite Tupper Saussy. Why? Because he's a conspiracy theorist. He's a conspiracy theorist, right? And that means that everything he said can be discounted. But I don't think so. What I think is that he is kind of a limited hangout. Consider that his career was all over the place, from musician to sketch to playwright, painter, um, and probably writing wasn't a big part of his life until he starts writing about, well, he did write plays, I guess, but writing about this very esoteric topic of how did the Jesuits fit into American history? Why did he do it? Was he aware that certain forces might be able to, well, let's put it this way. As a limited hangout, what he might be doing is preempting the rest of us finding this stuff out on our own. This reminds me of what Mark Kulak and Housatonic, what he's saying about and suggesting, I guess, about Dr. Robert Malone, is that he is telling a whole lot of truth in order to become like the leader of that truth movement. When you have, in the case of Tupper Saussy, disclosing what I think is actually the actual history of the Jesuits from 1534 until about 1865 when Lincoln is assassinated. That's the scope of his work. That he really did lay it out there, and I do believe that Lorenzo Ricci probably did survive and come to America and was there with some promissory notes to make sure that those that signed the Declaration of Independence got reimbursed if they lost their lives, fortunes, or sacred honor. The idea of the book was that Ricci was there as an agent of the Jesuits to make sure that the revolution happened, and that could only happen if he could convince all of those founding fathers that, hey, don't worry, we got you covered if you lose. And I love that. I think that probably rings true. So much of what he wrote rings true. And then you end up with the real fact of the matter, and that is that the dome of the Capitol really is a apotheosis of George Washington. And it really does have historical and Greek and Roman mythological figures, biblical figures there, as well as American history things up there. And the symbology, well, Saucy does go more into the symbology in the later chapters of his book, but I'm not going to go back into it. I think you understand what we're saying here is that this is a pagan image put there for the service of the Jesuits in bending America away from the Protestant religion into a kind of a place where sin can happen, a Manichaean world almost in it's like the Jesuits decided that, yeah, the best way for us to manage people really is to go with good and evil. And so we're going to make sure that there's evil. It's a remarkable philosophy that is consistent with what we read this morning. If you were able to be with me this morning when we were doing our fifth part of the series I'm doing on synarchy or synarchism, where we find that the popes And this is kind of a connection between the early American Republic and then looking back at Rome when you have Pope Pius the Ninth, and he's the Pope for like what, 30, 40 years up until 1870. And he has, the middle part of the boot, the whole Italian peninsula is divided up, and he's got the middle slice, and it's called the Papal States, and he makes a lot of money from that, you know? And so the Republic comes along and they take it away from him. He hates republics. And what he hates even worse is democracy. And he writes encyclicals about how he hates democracy. And then we have the story of the Treaty of Verona and Samuel F.B. Morse's warnings about the Jesuits in America. And of course, the whole story of Lincoln's assassination. So Tupper Saussy really did give us, I think, a sound basis to understand how it is that America came to be, why it came to be, and why all of this Catholic symbology is everywhere. Now you see that when Andy Craig and I went to the Red Mass together 2 or 3 years ago, and we saw the Supreme Court justices, we saw Attorney General Barr, we saw the bishops and the cardinals, and we know that the Supreme Court now has 6 Catholics. And when the United States was founded, they didn't even have a Catholic bishop yet. And there was only 20, 30,000 Catholics, maybe 50,000, but you know what I mean. It was minimal compared to the number of Protestants and other denominations. So, yeah, I think Tupper Saussy has told us the truth that this is really what happened. And that's why we now have this very, very strongly Catholic Supreme Court. And then we've done a lot of talking about this sovereign military order of Malta, but that's going to come into my readings when we read more about the Synarchy. And I'm looking forward to giving you my first reading of A Coup in Dallas by H.P. Albarelli, which will be Thursday night at 8 p.m. And I am devouring that book. It's really ties a lot together. I'm going to be giving you some more from the World Commerce Corporation essay um, that I read this morning. And I recommend you guys, if you have time, to go to the McClory's blog. I'll spell it for you. It's called, it's MikeMcClaughry.wordpress.com. And his name is Mike, McClaughry. And I'll be reading some more from their really, I think, detailed and important essays on the World Commerce uh, Corporation. And I may do that tomorrow morning at 11 if I can. But I'll be continuing with that in my series on Synarchy because I think they have really done a great job, and there's lots of good stuff to come in that essay. We're about halfway through it. So that's the deal with Tupper Saucy. I think that we need to just stop here and not try to go on further in the book because of his the way he wraps up the book is kind of mm, it doesn't ring true to me. And this has happened in a number of the books that I've read, and that's why I think of him more as a limited hangout than is somebody that just got inspired and went to the library and had to just learn everything he possibly could and write it down. So we're supposed to know this stuff, but then when we run into it in other places, we're supposed to kind of get that radioactive feeling of, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. So that's all I got for you tonight. Thanks for being with me. And do, if you haven't listened to it all, do listen to all 17, this is 18 parts of Rulers of Evil, which I have now, courtesy of Jumping Mouse. Yay, Jumping Mouse. Uh, she has archived it over at BitChute. My BitChute address is McDuff Uncensored, and you'll find all of our recent playlists there. We're using BitChute for our archives. So if you haven't checked that out yet, get over to BitChute and let people know that you can listen to the entire 17, 18 parts by just starting the playlist. I think it's a great talking point, and plus to be able to think about, wow, what was going on in 1545? What was going on in 1650? All of these dates that he was able to cover and tie together in Jesuit history, and in now identifying the fact that these are the control freaks. These are the ones that are going to uh, use violence, or worse, use psychological means, Machiavellianism, and all of the usual torture, poison, false flags, lies. Yeah, it's shown, history has shown they will do it. Are they the ones that are doing it now? Stay tuned. I'm sure we'll know the answer by the time we finish with Macduff Lives. Thanks so much for being with me. I will see you. I'll probably do tomorrow morning because I really do want to get the Synarchy material out as quickly as I can. Thanks, everybody.